Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, good evening. I welcome you all. A lot of ground to cover here. So my name is Rabbi Jacobson, for those that may not know. And I've been leading this group now for many, many years. And I guess apropos to the title of the class tonight, Journeys, which is taken from the name of this week's Torah chapter. Massei in Hebrew means the journeys. Eila Massei b'nei Yisrael. These are the journeys of the children of Israel as they traveled through the wilderness, the 40 years from the time they left Egypt to the point when they come to the promised land. So this entire chapter is a summation of these journeys. So as I said, apropos to that, I would say that this, I don't like to call it class, but this gathering has been a journey, for me at least, and I know for some people as well. I hope it's also a journey for you. And in truth, as a microcosm of life itself is of course a journey. Now that may sound like a cliche, and you'd get on a greeting card or a bumper sticker or a magnet on your refrigerator. But the truth is, not all cliches are untruths. As just like the guy who said, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. So just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it isn't true. And if you think about it, to understand that life is a journey, your life, my life, every life, and that every encounter, experience, interaction that you're having throughout life, the people you'll meet, the places you'll travel to, the psychological moods, swings that we'll go through in life, including even the negative ones. If you see it all as a journey, it does take on a completely different context. And what I mean by that, to simply put it in simple terms, you know the expression, another cliche, to see the forest from the trees. So we all appreciate that concept, but very few of us live by it, because we are consumed with the moment, and when you're on the ground level, all you see are the trees. It's not easy to step back and take a bird's eye view of your life, because you're immersed in it. And you're immersed in it with all your subjective interests and self-interests and the distortions and the stereotypes and all the different forces that shape the way you think, the way we all think. None of us are immune from being subjective. Every human being is a subjective human being. The difference between someone who's trapped by their subjectivity and someone who's not is awareness. Is the humility that you're aware and you're able to acknowledge that you're subjective. That, as they say, as the mystics and the wise sages say, that have the cure of a disease is knowing you have it. Awareness. And awareness doesn't just mean some abstract awareness, but fundamentally understanding that when it comes to judging yourself, you're the last person that can really do so. There's actually an interesting Torah law, which has been now, I'm going to use the word plagiarized, but adapted into modern constitutional law in the United States and other countries. And the expression of the Talmud is, Ein adam masim atzmei rasha. A person cannot classify themselves as a rasha, as a wicked person. Ein adam masim atzmei tzaddik. And a person could also not classify themselves as a tzaddik, as a righteous person. Bottom line is, you can't classify yourself, because you are subjective. Subjectivity, interestingly, works both ways. You could say, well, it's understandable that you can't call yourself a tzaddik because you may be overlooking some of your own shortcomings. But why can't a person classify themselves as a rasha? You know yourself well. You could say, listen, I'm a wicked person. There you think a person should be trusted, because who's going to call themselves a wicked person? But interestingly, the Torah doesn't even allow us to do that, because who gave you the right to do that? And you may be subjective. People, often, in the name of low self-esteem, or feeling they have no value, and often this comes from a childhood where that message was repeated time and again. I wouldn't even say message. That an assault on the basic value of a child is when parents either abandon the child or overtly abuse the child. So it's not surprising there are people who grow up who don't feel they're worth anything. They don't feel they deserve. This is a reality, especially today. So sometimes your subjectivity takes the shape of you thinking worse of yourself than better of yourself. So it's not just one way that you're not trusted subjectively to say a compliment about yourself. You're also not completely trusted to classify yourself in a negative light, which is the Torah's brilliance in understanding human subjectivity. That doesn't mean you cannot describe yourself. That doesn't mean you cannot attempt to describe what you're like. You know, people go to therapy and they try to describe themselves. But we have to also understand that a trained, objective person will take it with a grain of salt. You can share your experiences that only you know. No one else can know that. But the results of your experiences, of why you process information a certain way, what the choices you make, that is often too clouded. A blind spot is a blind spot. Not like that fellow who told me, I asked him if he has any blind spots. He says, yes, but I know what they are. Okay? A blind spot means you cannot see it. You may not even know where to look to know where that blind spot is. This is not meant to be critical, it's meant to be honest. And honesty is always the first step in any growth, not to be delusional, self-delusional. So, to go back to the concept of a journey versus the way we look at ourselves, we really don't see our lives as a journey. We see the moments. And our subjectivity clouds the ability to look at the bigger picture, which is very much how we were created. That's our nature. You see the moment. This is what some people call instant gratification. The moment seduces us. Something comes your way, you can be seduced by it no matter what your plans were like. How often has it happened that you know very clearly that something you shouldn't be doing, your mind tells you, but you still do it? That's a perfect example where your subjective interests cloud everything else. This happens all the time to all of us. That doesn't make you a bad person. It just the bad person would become if you deny that. If you say it's not really, you justify it. What really happens is your subjectivity begins to justify. You say, no, I didn't do it because I was subjective. It's really legitimately so. That's like somebody takes a bribe and they begin to believe their own bias. This happens also very common. People begin to believe their own self-interest, and then they really think it's objective. There are people I've met, after a while you just convince yourself, and that's it. So, to understand life as a journey requires stepping back and recognizing it's not the moments that control your life. It's not the trees, there is a forest. If we were able to do that, many of our life experiences would take on a whole different meaning. Think of it, if you think of your life like let's say a film. I don't want to compare it to that, but a film, and not a film that's produced by some human beings, a film that's produced by God, which has many unknowns ahead of you. And in the middle of the film, you decide to walk out. So you only saw the part of the film that came to that point. You didn't see where it's leading to. In other words, you don't see the big picture. It's like reading a book. So it says, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam, a person's life is like a book, a divine book. Now, of course, in this case, we also have free will, which means the characters in the story can choose to do things not exactly according to the script. But the bottom line is, there is a book element to it. So if you look at your life in that context, that's called a journey. That means that everything is leading to another place. And even though that may not take away the pain of some of the more difficult experiences in life, but it definitely blunts it, because at least you understand that it's going somewhere. There are many people who suffer sometimes seemingly senseless suffering, the hardest part of it all is it seems like it's senseless. It's not no accomplishment. I'm not suggesting that if there is accomplishment it makes the pain less, but at least you can understand. It makes a little more sense. That's why it's critical, and that's why this chapter in the Torah is such a powerful, just one word, journeys, to understand that life is a journey. And yes, while the Jews were going through the wilderness, it wasn't exactly a very comfortable experience all the time. And as a result, however, but they knew they're going toward the promised land. But if you look through the 42 journeys that they took, you'll see consistently their setbacks, their mistakes, their disappointments, and there are many experiences that are extremely negative. And every case, without fail, without exception, where there is a setback or where there is a painful experience, is always a result that they lost sight of the destination. And when you lose sight of the destination, you simply cannot hold on, especially in difficult times. So that's why the destination is so valuable, to understand that a journey means that every step is leading somewhere else, but also that understanding that every steps are leading toward a destination called the Promised Land. And look how ironic, tragically ironic it is. The Jews leave Egypt, and a little while later, within 2-3 years, they receive the Torah at Sinai, they build the Mishkan, the temple, and then Moses sends scouts to go scout out the Holy Land, the Promised Land. The scouts come back with a terrible report, and they instigate the people to not want to enter the Promised Land. And actually it's connected to this period in time in which we are, the 9 days coming up, the end of the 9 days, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the calendar. One of the things that happened on Tisha B'Av was that outcry. That was that so-called rebellion, mutiny against God's promised land, where they blasphemized and they slandered the land that God promised. So God says to them, you're crying all night about entering the promised land? I'll give you what to cry about. For generations to come, that became the saddest day of the calendar. Till this day we cry for the destruction of the temple, all resulting from these scouts. But the most immediate consequence of their outcry and their sin, was that God said, you don't want to enter the promised land? Like all self-defeating prophecies, I'll grant you your request and you won't enter. And at that point, it was decreed that they would travel for 40 years, not just a few years, because the trip from Egypt through the wilderness to Israel, if it's a direct trip, is not 40 years. So, it's a long walk, but not 40 years. God took them around. This was part of their punishment, and that they ultimately would not enter the promised land. They would come to the river Jordan, and there they would stop. And anyone that was from that generation, except two people, Joshua and Caleb, the two people who also were scouts, but they came back and they said a good report, they were the only ones that were rewarded to enter the promised land. Joshua, of course, as the leader in place of Moses. Even Moses, the great Moses, who was not part of this slander. On the contrary, he rebuked them. Even he, ultimately, as a result, the captains with the ship remains. Why? Because they lost sight of the destination. Here, they were promised that the whole purpose that you left Egypt and all the suffering, and the whole purpose that what Abraham paid a price for, and Isaac paid a price, and Jacob paid a price, and they sacrificed their lives, was all for one reason: that their grandchildren, their children and grandchildren, would leave Egypt and go to the promised land. That's what kept the string. That was the string that Abraham kept to hold on to. If you go back to the story of Abraham, and begins his journey, you see immediately in Lech Lecha, beginning of his journey, God meets, same chapter, the Bris Bein Absarim, where God makes the covenant with him and promises him the land, promised land. So you could say, why is God promising him the promised land? God knew fully well that his children are not entering the promised land for a long time. How do we know? Because it says in the verse, it says that 400 years your children will be exiled in the land that's not theirs. So why is it so important to tell Abraham that 400 years from now, 500 years from now, 440 years from now, however the calculations work there, from Isaac's birth, you should know that your grandchildren will end up being in this land that I promised you here today. In a way, you could say it's almost like Leig L'Rosh is an expression. It's like almost rubbing him his nose in the and putting salt on the wounds. Why? Because God is telling him, listen, here I'm showing you a land, but you should know you're not going to live there in peace. Your children won't live there in peace. They're first going to have to be in exile, and then at the end of the whole exile, I will take them there. She could think, God could have chosen not to tell this to Abraham. Tell Abraham, commit to what I'm telling you, and I will reward you. Or even Abraham wasn't even waiting for a reward. Maimonides, the Rambam, writes in the Laws of Tshuva when he talks about serving God. So he says that everybody serves for ulterior motives. You want to look it up, chapter 10, in the Laws of Tshuva. He says that he quotes the Gemara, the Talmud in Kedushin that says, "Le'elim yasek adam b'teira mitzvah shalei l'shma b'tech shalei l'shma ba l'shma," which means that a person should always, initially, le'elam, which means this is an initial approach. A person should serve Torah mitzvahs for ulterior motives, because from ulterior motives you'll ultimately come to do it for selfless motives. And the Rambam says this is the nature of human beings. Children may do it for reward. Some people do it for physical reward. Some do it for spiritual reward. Everyone has a motive. Some people do it because they were programmed to do it. They grew up in a home. This is what's accepted. They don't want to be rejected. Peer pressure. Everyone can look in their own heart and figure out what their motive is. And then the Maimonides says there's only one person in history that did it as he was his Eisis ha'emes mipnei shu emes. These are the words of Maimonides. Very powerful expression. He committed to truth because it was true. Who is this person? Abraham. Avram Oyavi, Maimonides quotes, Abraham, my beloved. What is the sign of love? You do it because you love the person, not because you're gaining anything out of it. That's true love. The only person that did it without ulterior motive. So clearly Abraham wasn't waiting for reward. I mean, since I'm mentioning this, I might as well share a very beautiful story. The Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism in the 17th, 18th century. So there was a woman who once came to him crying. She had a child that was very sick. And she was asking the Baal Shem Tov for a blessing, a prayer to heal her child. I know that story begins, many stories begin that way. But the end is different in this case. So the Baal Shem Tov, of course, had empathy, Rachmanis, and said, okay. He began to pray. And as the Baal Shem Tov recognized, the Baal Shem Tov recognized that in heaven it wasn't going to be so easy. The decree was passed. And the more he prayed, the more resistance he felt. Until the point that he was told from heaven that this decree do not try to abolish. This is the pass from heaven. This child cannot live. Baal Shem Tov, of course, did not give up. And he was told, listen, you're tampering with, called Seder Hishtalshalos. You're tampering with the whole balance of things. There'll be grave consequences. You know, the Talmud says, "Tzaddik goyzer HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim," that when a tzaddik, a righteous person, decrees something, heaven itself complies. And there's even a stronger expression that tzaddik is Kadosh Baruch Hu goyzer tzaddik mevatel. A tzaddik has the power even to abolish a decree that heaven itself decreed. So the Baal Shem Tov knew that, and he continued to pray. And of course, he was successful as the Talmud, being a tzaddik. But the call came out from heaven that the Baal Shem Tov, as a result of his insisting, the child will live, that we grant him. But because of that, the Baal Shem Tov loses his share in the world to come. The story goes. Which of course is not a small consequence. You lose your share in this world, it's a material world, it's temporary anyway. The share in the world to come is the world of the soul, which is eternal. So the story goes that when the Baal Shem Tov heard that, he began to dance. And when his students asked him, why are you dancing? So he said, because till now he was serving God for ulterior motives, for a share in the world to come. Now he knows he can start serving God for no motive at all, because he doesn't have a share in the world to come. So that's why he's dancing. It's a very deep simcha. So the end of the story goes that when they heard that in heaven, they said, give him back his Olam Haba, give him back his world to come. That we were not going to grant him such a joy. Anyway, but to go back to the point here, is that we all serve for ulterior motives except Abraham. So why did God have to tell Abraham? In a way, as I said, it's like a type of almost causing him pain. That here's the promised land, I show it to you, but no, you can't get it. And the answer is a very profound but also a very simple answer. There was a custom in the olden days, they say, that there were in different armies, that they would sing a victory march as soon as you went out to war, before the first battle, which seems like an odd thing to do. How could you sing a victory march? You haven't even fought a battle. And the reason was, it was to build up, to bolster the morale of the people, because when you know and you feel confident that you can win, you fight in a different way. You know, Vietnam is a good example. Not only did they not know they can win, they didn't even know what they're fighting for. It's another story. Well, so what's the destination? Can you embark on a journey when you have no clue what the destination is? That's called in the Hebrew achzarias. That was a very cruel thing to do, to send somebody to do something, and you don't tell them what the destination is, and you don't give them the confidence that they can reach it. So when God told Abraham and made the promises to Abraham and told him that yes, your children will suffer, and he told him that 400 years there'll be a land not their own, but afterwards they'll go out with great wealth. He showed him the promised land and actually walked he walked to length, to width, he walked all over the land. So this land will be yours where you are walking now. Why was that important? Because he was telling Abraham the secret. This is the destination. There is a destination. In truth is, he was really telling him not just the promised land, it was about the geula, about the redemption. That ultimately, after all the generations of exile, because as the Medrash says, that dark night, that there was a deep dread, the darkness that befell Abraham when God made the covenant, the Bris Bein Absarim with him. So the Midrashim, the commentaries all explain, the oral interpretation there, that those verses are referring to all the four major exiles that Abraham's children would have to endure. The Egyptian Empire, that's discussed right directly in the verse. Then the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek, and finally the harshest of all, the Roman, Malchus Edom, grandchildren of Esau, would be the Roman Christian Western world, which we today still consider to be that's the ultimate final exile that we are in right now. The Romans destroyed the temple, which is what we are, why we honor that in these 3 weeks, concluding with Tisha B'Av. And the Abarbanel explains that this exile also includes the Ishmael Empire, which may be the Ottoman Empire, or the Muslim world, basically. So we are still dealing with those conflicts. It's another discussion, not for today. I've written about it, and if you want to hear more about that, I can refer you. On our website, we have plenty of material on that. But the bottom line is that Abraham was shown all the future generations. But the key is that the end, I will show you the destination. This was God's gift. Because Abraham then was able to share with his children and tell them, look, life is going to be difficult. There are many unknowns ahead. He knew that. He didn't know maybe the extent of it. But he said, but I give you also a gift, which is there will be a promised land. At the end of it, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's an end process, and therefore it will be worth it. So I have no doubt that the strength that Abraham had, and Sarah, and then Isaac and Rebekah, and then Jacob and his family, and all the generations afterwards, and even till this day, that the Jews were able to endure the most difficult of circumstances was only possible for one reason. They also knew there was another side to the coin, that there was also a destination. And because they held on to that promise, like we say in the Haggadah, on Passover, we say, V'hi sha'amdalanu. And she, V'hi is just a very vague term, a feminine, V'hi sha'amdalanu. And it is she that withstood it all. And talks about there that in every generation there are those that will rise up and try to destroy the Jews. And God will redeem them. What's the Hisha Amdalanu? So the commentaries on the Haggadah say, some say he is the promise, the Haftacha. It is the promise that God made that helped us withstand it all. Some say he goes on Amunah, on faith, which is also the feminine, Amunah, Haftacha. But regardless, it's the same concept, that there was something that went along with every challenge. I remember a man told me who suffered a terrible tragedy in his life. Lost his wife at a very young age with children. It was one of these really tragic stories. And I spoke to him. I used to speak to him a lot whenever I had an opportunity. You learn many things from people that go through that. The refinement that some people gain through that is impossible to describe. So I remember I asked him once, I wouldn't have obviously pry or an area that he wouldn't let me in, but I asked him once, what was it that gave you the ability to endure that? So he said, of all the things that people told him, he doesn't remember what people said to him at the time. But one thing he remembers, that an older chassid said to him. He said to him, told him Reb, his name was Reb Chaim, he said, remember, in Yiddish he said, I'll say it in Yiddish, then I'll translate. He says, Reb Chaim, zal allemaal gedenken, als mit jeder pekel tzaddis, geht der Eibishter eich a pekel keches. He said to him, with every, baggage, every pekel, how do you translate pekel? Every package of pains, of tzaddis. Tzaddis is more than pains. Tzaddis is like oy vey type of pains. The bad. So he says, with every package of pains, you also get a package of strength. And he said he didn't understand it at the time, but with time he realized that he was able to access that. And you'll always see consistently, this is as consistent as it gets, the people who have endured the harshest experiences will always tell you that there was another strength that was just as powerful. These are Holocaust survivors, people who seemingly irrational that they would want to rebuild lives and after what they saw. It's hard to imagine even. But there has to be some strength within the soul. Now, there's no question there are people who are destroyed and demoralized and broken by pain. That would be seeming the more logical approach. But so that's nothing to analyze there. That would be seem the inevitable. But the surprising thing is when you find people that were able to endure. What's the secret? That's what we'd like to know. So Viktor Frankl says it was the people who understood that life had meaning, that there was a purpose to it all. Not that they knew the purpose, but that they believed in purpose. So what do you think purpose really means? Design. It means there's a destination. It means there's a plan. There's a journey involved. And even that worst of, maybe the unprecedented worst of tragedy in human history called the Holocaust, though no one can justify it, and we're not trying to, but to suggest that it's the end would have been a worse Holocaust. And the Jews simply that survived could not accept that that's the end of the story. And that's why they endured. They had to do it for themselves and for their parents and for those that were lost, that the journey continues. We may never understand, even though there's a verse in Yeshaya that says, Oitcha Hashem kenaftabi, that when Mashiach comes, we will acknowledge, Oitcha Hashem, we will thank God for punishing us, for hurting us, for putting us through torture. Well, first of all, you need Mashiach's times to even understand what that means. That's another story. Does that mean we will understand it, or will it mean that we'll understand that it all led somewhere? So it's not a rationalization. It doesn't say Itcha Hashem kenaftabi that we'll have answers to all the tragedies of history. It means we'll still be able to thank God and say thank you. Not for the tragedy per se, but I guess for the whole experience. But you can interpret it many different ways. That's not the point. The point being is that this week's chapter, in one word, Massei, tells us an unbelievable message, that your life is a journey. And it's not a journey that began when you were born, and it's not a journey that will end when you reach 120 or 160. It's a journey that began thousands of years ago, and there's a big picture, and we are small little people that see a very small part of the picture. Like I've shared many times here, when people ask me the question, one of the biggest questions you hear always is, where does the soul go to after death? Where does the neshama go? Seems like a logical question. We're here and we want to know where the soul goes. But if you think about it, and this is the way I always respond, the question itself as is often the case, is based on a false premise. And that premise is even an arrogant premise. And that premise is that you think you know you're where it's at, so you're asking where the soul goes to. So I always use this somewhat ridiculous analogy, like an imaginary dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. I like refrigerator. It sounds, as I said, weird. So just you'll understand, just imaginary. This is not real, so no one think I'm off the wall here. So not like I don't hear actually conversation going on between the refrigerator. But think of it this way: the refrigerator, or for that matter, you can use any appliance if you like, a light bulb, an air conditioner, whatever you like, a BlackBerry. That when you pull the plug, let's say of the refrigerator, so the refrigerator says to electricity, where do you go to when this plug is pulled or when they shut the switch? Plug is pulled is more appropriate here. Okay. So the electricity responds, of course, to the refrigerator. What do you mean? What kind of arrogant question is that? What do you mean where I go to? Where did you come from? They just created you, invented a refrigerator the last century or two, the small box that has certain type of technology that's able to contain electricity, and by doing so it's able to refrigerate food. But you were never around before, this small box. Now that you're on the scene, you suddenly ask me where I go. I go back to where I always was, which is a place that's beyond space in a way. Electricity doesn't occupy space quite the same way like a refrigerator does. And that's where I always was, and I'm not contained only by your little box. So yes, in a way it's very humorous, but the fact is it's exactly the same thing with a soul and a body. For us to say, where does a soul go to after death, is equivalent. What do you mean? It's as if we know where it's all at, we have the whole picture, and I was just wondering one little corner of the world, where does the soul go to? Maybe it's the other way around, that we have very little inkling, we have a small little peak, barely of what we even know consciously. What do we really know? Here's the frame of a human body is, let's say, 5-6 feet tall, 100, 200, 300 pounds. Won't go into that. But there is a limit. So this small frame of a body, how much do we really know of this body? Why don't you ask the best doctors you know, how much do we really know, percentage-wise? Good, humble doctors will tell you, we know enough that there's no question life expectancy and healing and medicine has gone through revolutionary changes. But with all that we know, there's so much more we know. Ask any doctor, especially in areas of, let's say, fertility, where everything on paper should make sense and still a woman cannot conceive. You talk about mapping the brain. We're not even talking about the brain, the size of your palm. There, scientists will tell you we know 1%, 5%. We don't even know how much percent because we don't know what we don't know. The same thing will be said about subatomic particles. How many layers of subatomic, subatomic particles are there? No one has a clue. So in 1898, so goes the folklore, the patent officer of the United States, I've been told this isn't true, but it's a good story anyway. Because the point that's being made. The patent officer of, a debate is raging, I think, in Google somewhere. You can go in Google space. The patent officer of the United States resigned, purportedly, because he said everything that could be invented has been invented. So there's no job for him left in the U.S. Patent Office in 1898. Now, of course, that's before the airplane and before the automobile and before Einstein and before quantum mechanics and before computers and all that. Today, no one's going to make such a statement. Because the more you know how little we know. It's like climbing a mountain. You see a horizon. The higher you climb, the more you know, the wider the horizon. So that doesn't mean we know less. It just means that part of knowledge is knowing there's a bigger picture. So we have no idea, no clue how far this can go. Or as they say, how far does the rabbit hole go? No one knows. We have no idea. This does not minimize knowledge. This is not like, when we were in high school, I was the editor of our what do you call it? Yearbook. So, we were a little mischievous and we didn't have an editor so we could stick things in there. And it was printed and that's it. Not today. I look back a little embarrassing. So we found, of course, the favorite poem of all high school students. And that is, the more you know, the more you forget. The more you forget, the less you know. The less you know, the less you forget. The less you forget, the more you know. So why study? That was our... I'm sure you can find a flaw in the logic, but it sounded good. So we stuck it into the yearbook. It was like our big, contribution to the 20th century. Or something. So this doesn't mean when the Ikrim, Yosef Alba, one of the great middle-aged thinkers, writes Tachlis Hayediyah Shalei Neda, that the ultimate of knowledge is Shalei Neda, that you don't know. So literally, you can interpret that. The more you know, the more you realize how little you know, or how you don't know anything. Some Hasidic masters interpret it Tachlis Hayediyah Shalei Neda, more literally, that the ultimate of knowledge is knowing the unknowable. So you can know the unknowable as well. But however you interpret it, what we do have is that there's a much bigger picture, and this is even on the conscious level, what we know consciously. So we know less about this body that your soul is occupying right now than we know about many millions of miles in outer space. So to make a statement, where does the soul go to, you can understand is coming from a very myopic perspective. So when the Torah begins this week's chapter, or the name of this week's chapter, Journeys, the gift of it, the message of it, is as Abraham passed on to his children, that life is a journey. So as I said earlier, even though it sounds like a cliche, but if you think about it, it's an unbelievable, profound message. If we knew that all the time, we would be able to endure anything. No question about it. Because even the harshest of times, if you know you're on a journey, you know you're not going to stay there. What's the harshest part of suffering? You think you're stuck here. You don't think you're ever going to get out. It's hopeless. The sense of hopelessness. I mentioned last week that the opening of all the Jeremiah's witnessing the destruction of the temple, and he wrote the book of Lamentations, Eicha. Of all the things that he described, he opens the book not with the deaths that he saw, not with the expulsion, not with the hunger, not with the destruction of the temple, the holiest place on earth, the Holy of Holies being desecrated. He begins with, relatively, you can think, a very almost minor thing. He says, Eicha Yoshva Badad. Woe, that she sits alone. The she is referring to Jerusalem. Of all the things, what disturbed him most, or you could say if he opens up with that, it must have been a big thing, was the loneliness. Because in pain, the harshest thing is if you know you have friends, you have people, and you know that it's a step to something, you can endure it. But when you think you're all alone, which is what unfortunately tragedy does, it makes you alone, because you don't feel anyone can understand or anyone can be where I am right now, that's the harshest part of it. That's not dismissing the tragedy itself, don't get me wrong, but Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, recognized that's what bothered him more than anything. That's how he opens, that she sits alone. Like, where is God? Where are the promises? Where are the tzaddikim? Where are all the rewards that we were promised? That's the most difficult. You feel abandoned. You feel betrayed. And then you don't have strength to fight. You know, people can be in a sad thing can happen to a person, God forbid. But if you have strength to fight, or you have strength of others that help you, support, or you feel God is with you, then at least you can make it through. Which maybe is one of the brilliant powers of, God forbid no one should know of this, but when a person sits Shiva for a parent or for a close relative, I could speak sadly from my experience when I sat Shiva for my father. So I had consoled many people in my life, but here I was being consoled, and it wasn't an easy thing, obviously. But I remember not at the time the whole thing is just one overwhelming whiz, but afterwards I realized the wisdom, the brilliance, that the 7 days, people keep on coming, and just they like this, like a whirlwind of human beings, and you can't even process it. In a way, it's like it buffers you from the pain, because you're just so busy saying hello to people, and you don't want to ignore anyone, and this and that, and they come out, and that's not relevant what people tell you even. The fact that they just come, which is really what the mitzvah is. The mitzvah is you have to give a speech, or you're going to find some brilliant things to tell someone who suffered loss. It doesn't work that way. It's just being there. And that is like human beings have the power to console each other. That gives strength. There's no question about it. You know, God forbid if you don't have that, then you're left all alone with your thoughts and your memories and the loss and the so-called permanence of the sense of permanence that you're disconnected from this person that you love forever. and all of that. So not that any of this is minimized, but but in those early days of shock, the buffer of human beings helps you find some strength. You're able to make it through, and then begins. In ways, it's more difficult after the shiva in many ways. But we should only know of good things since we're talking about the 3 weeks. So we talk about the 42 journeys. All is part of a journey, and that means in simple English, this is not some abstract philosophy. It means each of you, each of us, everyone here in this room, has your journeys. Things you've gone through and things you will go through. Will it all be positive and pleasant? Absolutely not. What's ahead of us? We don't really know, but we do know it's a journey. I think it was Kierkegaard that wrote that we can only understand life backwards, but we have to live it frontwards. In Lahavdil, do you say Lahavdil, Joseph? I don't know. In the book of Psalms, King David says, Ma'ashem itzadigover keinonu, which means God leads the footsteps of a human being. The Baal Shem Tov makes this a fundamental principle of Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, that the places you are in and places you will go to, you're led there. What you do with it is your free will, but you don't go there because you decided that that's a good place to go to. So if God wants you somewhere, He'll find some excuse for you to get there. Like, of course, if a little angel came to you and said, listen, you got to go to this in the city because you have a spiritual mission to fulfill, most of us are going to look at our calendar and say, well, I don't have time for that right now. When I retire, come back to me, So what God does, He finds some excuse. Oh, there's a business opportunity. Okay, that I have time for. Oh, it's a great vacation spot. Great. I have friends going, whatever. So you find all kinds of good reasons. So you think you're going for your so-called myopic reasons. And meanwhile, God has you where He wants you, and magical things can happen. There's a lesson in that. It's not just a small thing. It means when you go somewhere, always keep your eyes open for something unexpected. You may have come for one reason that you think, and something else is the true reason that you're there. That doesn't mean the first reason that you went for is meaningless. It could be valuable too. But that's your plans. But there's always a higher plan. You're open to things like that, surprises will happen. If you close yourself off to it, sometimes the answer to your prayers will also be given to you there, and you didn't allow yourself to see it because you came for your agenda. The greatest things happen to people, by the way, is when they don't make plans for it. Because you're not in the way. You don't get in the way, Mensch fragt, Gott lacht is the expression in Yiddish. I've struggled to find an equivalent rhyme in English, but it means essentially a person thinks and God laughs. In Yiddish, thinks and laughs rhymes, but in English it doesn't. So, what?
It says man plans and God laughs.
Okay, that doesn't rhyme either, but fine. The idea is clear. So, the concept, therefore, that your life is a journey, can be extremely powerful. In number one, in looking for purpose in your experiences, and two, for somewhat dulling the pain of sometimes difficult experiences, because that too is part of the journey. Again, this is not a justification. We constantly pray and ask. We should not be put in a place of a test, an assignment. We should have pleasant lives. We always ask for the blessing that your life should be peaceful and good, and it's a legitimate request. We say it every day, many times in the prayers. But nevertheless, life still has its surprises, and we don't always know where it's going to go. So that's the journey story. So the Baal Shem Tov says that the 42 journeys, which are enumerated in this week's chapter, Eila Massei B'nai Yisrael, so his grandson Degel Machna Ephraim, and the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, and others, citing the Baal Shem Tov, say that the Baal Shem Tov taught that these 42 journeys, every one of us will go through in our lifetimes. And that's why the Torah puts so much focus on them. Because why would we need to know? Vayisu, Vayachnu, they went here, and they stopped here, and again they went here. Even if we need to know it for some reason, the Torah doesn't say it once, it says it twice. If you read the chapters after the Jews left Egypt, and if you look for it, you'll find. It says they left Egypt, they were Ramses, they went to Sukkot, and then the story continues about the journey. And the Torah in different places continues that journey, especially in the book of Bamidbar, the beginning of the book of Numbers. The story continues. So you can find the journeys in the story. Nevertheless, the Torah felt necessary to come to the end of book of Numbers, this chapter, this week, end of book 4 of the Torah, to repeat it all and sum it up with the names. So clearly there's more than just meets the eye. It's not just about some historical narrative. Now, especially when you look into the names of the places, most of them are extremely cryptic. And as one of the Hasidic masters asked the question, this is a wilderness. Who gave them names anyway? There's some of the places people lived. Some of the places others traveled through. But many of the places, the first time anyone was ever there, this was a real wilderness. So who gave them this name? Like when they came to this place where no one was ever there, what was there, a sign on top that said, who put... And as a matter of fact, some of the names are associated with things that happened to the Jewish people at that place. Like Morah is named because of the bitter waters. You have other places that are named by things that happened at that place. So clearly the name was given in association with the Jewish journey. So in the last 7 weeks, I guess it is, I've been researching this. I decided to take the plunge. Several years ago, actually 10 years ago, I saw the document that I created 10 years ago. It was an idea I had then. I'm going to try to, as I did with the Omer book, the 49 steps. So I thought maybe we could figure out what these 42 journeys are in each of our lives. Problem is, when I started researching it 10 years ago, I got stuck. I found 5 or 6 of them, and I couldn't figure out the rest. So that was not enough to really, 5 out of 42 wouldn't justify I would say, an essay, let alone a book. But then this year, I don't know, one Thursday night I was looking to what to write about, around 8 weeks ago. And looking through some of my old documents, I had some writer's block, as they say. And I was looking, I found this document, and I said, yeah, maybe I'll try to do this. But then I remembered, 5 out of 42, where am I going to find the rest of them? So I decided to take the plunge. Since, as we said, everything is a journey, who knows where it's going to go? I put the pressure on myself that if I promise to do it, and I start writing it, I'm going to have no choice. I'm going to have to figure it out. And I realize sometimes that's the only way to go. I don't know if that works for any of you. For me, it works. Sometimes, with good things. Sometimes you just have to take the plunge, you commit, and then you're stuck. And it's usually a good type of stuck. Sometimes you regret that you did it, but better being stuck that way than being stuck in other situations, which I guess I don't have to describe to the wonderful people here.
Excuse me, can you just pass me a siddur, please?
The minion will be downstairs, by the way.
No, I just want to say the bracha after Rabbi.
Okay. So I decided, as I said, to take the leap, and I began writing, and it was really, I must say, it's quite difficult. First of all, to dig up just the meaning of these names was no small task. Some of them are obvious, some of them the Torah says, some of the commentary, Rashi, but most I had to really start looking in Medrash and in Rakeach. I mean, if you're following the articles I'm doing, the series, which this week will be coming to the last 4. So 38, I could be able to figure out 38. I think I'll figure out the last 4. You'll see from the citations there that I had to really dig very, very deep to find what the meanings are, and once you find the meanings, a pattern emerges. By no means is this a definitive way of describing the 42 journeys. I'm sure there can be other applications, like anything in the Torah, but I feel pretty confident that it is definitely grounded in sources. It's not just some type of forcing it. That was my concern. I didn't want to force it into the journeys. And what I discovered in this process, in this journey, so to speak, that the Baal Shem Tov's line is unbelievable. And when he said that the 42 journeys we all go through, there's no question about it. And not only that, there's a pattern that evolves. And in some, I'm just actually looking at the articles that I've written. And I'm not going to go through all the 42 here because it's a little too much. But there is generally a pattern where it begins from birth. This is the Baal Shem Tov actually does say. He says when the Jews left Egypt, leaving Egypt, as the book of Yecheskel compares it to birth. Goy Mekerev Goy. The idea of leaving, like the description there, he uses the description of a pregnancy, that when the Jews left Egypt, it was like a child emerging from the womb. So he describes the first journey, which is leaving Egypt, as the birth, and all the way going to the 42nd is the point when we're about to enter the Promised Land, which can mean also entering the world to come, or the world of Mashiach, or basically reaching the destination of our lives, in the ultimate sense of it. And when you go through the different steps, you really see, and that was of course a key, because he's essentially saying that the first step is birth. And I realized, as I said through the research, that the first steps, 1 to 5, are actually the birth through childhood into the maturity process. I'll describe that in a minute, more detail, the names of the places. After that come the next few journeys are about different adversarial forces that we will encounter early in life. And then goes through literally journey by journey, most of the challenges, I would say not most, every challenge or every milestone that all of us will go through. For example, accessing power, confronting weakness, having revelation in your life, craving, kivra sataiva, a place where you crave or you have a desire for something. It could be healthy or not healthy. Rebellion, resignation. Then there's the next journey is about building a family and a home. Then there's dealing with failure. There's dealing with conformity, mob mentality, a state of where you're a beautiful state, a state of fear, a state of unity, a state of community. And then as it processes, as it progresses, you see actually the middle age blues that we all go through, the low points, challenges, also the positive things. You start seeing the fruits of your labor. You start seeing the ability to become a counselor, advisor to others. And then come the last stages, which are of course the later stages of life, and some of them are quite difficult, when we begin to deal with mortality, illness, and the darkness that comes with it. So literally every one of these journeys, as the Baal Shem Tov clearly states, is a place that we have been or will be in our lives. So I think it's an unbelievable study to be able to actually identify and say maybe you can find where you are. I'm getting very interesting feedback where someone writes to me, maybe I can skip journey number 37. I've had enough of that. They're stuck in 37 for the last 20 years, she writes to me. Okay, that's interesting too. But just being able to identify it, and when you look at it, you really see that it resonates, I think is quite a freeing experience. Number one is you realize that you're not alone in this. So though each of us may experience it differently, obviously, we're different people, we're unique. But overall, the experiences are part of a process that all humans will go through. And above all, we realize that this is Eila Massei, B'nai Yisrael. As he goes on, the pasuk says, the verse says, these are the journeys that God led them through. It says, Al pi Hashem yachnu, al pi Hashem yisu. Every step of the way was, as I said before, God leads the footsteps of a person. Mashem mitzadei gavur kananu. Which tells you that even the journeys that are challenging and can bring the worst out of you, and sometimes do, you were led there. What you do with it is your choice. So for instance, the Baal Shem Tov, this is one that the Baal Shem Tov himself interprets. There's a place they call Kivrei Sataiva. The Kivrei Sataiva literally means the graveyard of craving. Why? Because at that place the Jewish people craved for meat. God said, you want meat? He gave them meat, literally the verse says, till it comes out of your nose. It's not my words, it's the words of the verse. And they end up dying in their craving, which is, we know that sometimes desire has that power. Your desire consumes you to the point that it destroys you. They have today these studies and tests, drug addiction and so on, where monkeys are fed and addicted to cocaine, and every time they press a button, they get an injection, and it's proven that you get to a point where the monkeys will kill themselves. They literally will keep pressing because they get so obsessed with their own desire that they will destroy themselves physically. Now I don't know if we need monkeys to prove that. You see it all the time with human beings. So here's of course a tragic journey where they ended up being destroyed by their own cravings. But the Baal Shem Tov, in his unique way, interprets the verse in the opposite direction. He says kivras hataiva could also be translated as burying your desires. That your desires become so meaningless that it's as if you bury them, you kill them. So clearly what he's saying is that each one in our journey, in our lives, we will come to a point where you will be challenged and seduced by some desire. Desires, the list goes on. I don't think I have to list your desires. It's one of the things, we have to list, I guess, the mitzvahs. The desires are easy to list. Just, let your imagination flow, and I'm sure you'll come up with a bunch of desires. It's like, And if you have no desires, you see me afterwards. I'd like to learn how you manage that. So desires we all have. Some desires are not even unhealthy. They're desires for great things, for beautiful things. Desire per se, even the word lust, taiva, in Hebrew, is not always used as a negative. As a matter of fact, the greatest statement about why God created the universe is used in the context of a taiva, of a desire. The Medrash says, and this is quoted in Tanya, in chapter 36, as a fundamental principle, why did God create the universe? So there are many reasons given for this, but ultimately the ultimate reason is given because Nisava, Kodesh Baruch Hu, Liyas Loi Yisbarach Dira B'Tachtenu. God desired, the word is Nisava, not Nisratze, not Rotzen, which is will, and there are many words in the Torah that can be used to describe what God wants or desires. They specifically use the word Taiva, Nisava, which is very confusing because usually that word is used not always in positive ways. In Yeshiva they would tell us you don't give in to your taivas, as they say. You don't give in to your desires. And here suddenly you realize that God himself has a desire. I'm not getting now into the anthropomorphic element. What does it mean that God has a desire? Obviously he's not human, so we're talking metaphorically. But it's using that expression that is symbolic of what we call desire. So the Balatani, the Alter Rebbe says the reason the word is used is to emphasize that it's Lamayel Meseichel. Afataiva, as he says in Shtakin Kasha, that the reason that God created the universe, the desire to have a home in this world, is beyond the rational. In the sense like super-rational. That's why he uses that expression. But nevertheless, as I said, this expression conjures up a lot of negative stuff. So clearly you see that the word taiva is not necessarily a negative thing. On the contrary, in this case, it's the ultimate God's desire to transform this world into a home for the divine. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying, so when they came to this place, they had a choice. This was the name of the place. This doesn't mean that when you come to this place in your life, you're predestined to be destroyed by your desires. You have the choice. Either you'll be consumed by them, which is the pshat interpretation, the literal interpretation, or you will consume the desires, meaning you will bury them. You'll be able to control them, harness them, use them for something positive. Which is, no question, the power. It says, Kol hagodol mechavere yitzrei godol mimenu. The greater the person, the greater the Yetzer Hara. Which in simple English means, when you have great strengths, there's always great potential for damage. Look at some of the most destructive people in history. It was because they were so powerful, they just misused it, they abused it. Mediocre people can only make mediocre problems. Great people can make great problems. And the greater you are, the biggest enemy you can be of your own. The smarter a person is, they can achieve great things, but the smarter you are, you also have the smartest excuses. The most brilliant people I know, not all of them, but many, they're the people that cover their tracks. You can never identify that they are a culprit. They always know how to do it. They have an excuse for everything. The excuses are so brilliant that you can't trace them to their own liabilities. So great wisdom also comes with the great ability to know how to blame everyone else and make a great case for it, and nobody can prove otherwise because you have it so figured out. So all strengths always come with the other side, or the way King Solomon, Zelu Umazeh Asa Lekim. God created a parallel universe. For every great strength there's a great resistance in equal proportion. So we have choice. So we come to a place of desire, as the Baal Shem Tov says. Desire has great power. The desires of a human being can change the world. When you desire something really powerful, the obsession of desire used for the right thing, harnessed, can create revolution for the good. But also we know the opposite is also true. Sexuality is one of the most potent, maybe the most powerful force in human life. And we see that the power of sexuality can consume a person, can create a type of ugliness and darkness that maybe nothing parallels the darkness that sexual experiences can create. The guilt associated with it, the damage done, the lies, the jealousies, the obsession, the pure obsession. So in history, and you look at thinkers and philosophers, they look at sexuality, you find everyone's confused. What do you do with this thing called sexuality? So in Christianity, Kavyachal, as they say, the ultimate, the ultimate leader, Pope, priest, is to be celibate. Now, if you do this a Google search on this, you're going to find out that it doesn't trace back to Jesus. It has actually to do with real estate, because there was a problem in the 7th or 8th century, I'm not sure which, but sometime there, where the children of the priests were who didn't always want to go into the clergy had this issue: who owns the buildings, who owns the churches. So the church decided to get rid of this real estate inheritance problem. Priests cannot have children. Whether they had them or not is another story, but at least the children couldn't claim legitimacy, so that solved that real estate problem. This is not my creation. This you can look up. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
Only rabbis should have
So the approach of, let's call it, asceticism or celibacy in Judaism is absolutely categorically rejected. As a matter of fact, a chaver in Sanhedrin, a person who's in the Supreme Court, a person who's a leader, a high priest, anyone that's a rabbi leader is supposed to be married. You cannot have a chaver Sanhedrin who's a bachelor. Nothing wrong with bachelors, but that's not the place for them. So what is the sexuality? So just for contrast purposes, the concept of original sin. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree, original sin entered into this world. And since then, sexuality became, as some Christian writers say, necessary evil. Judaism absolutely rejects that. There is no devil in this world, and not that believing in some Jew will redeem you from it. Though definitely there's a change of consciousness that happened when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, and they became aware, as the Torah says, of their nakedness. They became aware of their sexuality, so that created problems, and that's why they covered themselves. Before that, they were like newborn children, completely unaware and very pure, and it was their sexuality was part of God's plan. As Maimonides explains, yet the Ramban, Nachmanides, has a letter that he writes where he begins and opens up, and it's clear that he's counteracting anyone that I guess was Christianized in their version of sexuality. He writes that God forbid to say that sexuality is anything, a dover gnai, anything embarrassing, anything negative, anything evil. It's divine. It's as divine as anything that God created. Who created sexuality? It was God that created it. Does it pose challenges? Of course it poses challenges. It's mystique, it's mystery. So from a Torah point of view, sexuality is the ultimate concept of a desire that can go both ways. In the name of this desire, people can build unbelievable strengths, families, love, bear children, which is bringing life into this world. It's the only way you can bring life, the only way you can somewhat simulate what God is creation. But we also know the same power has the power to be so destructive. So from a Torah point of view, intimacy, and as opposed to sexuality, divorced from intimacy, intimacy is called das. In the Torah it's called knowing your spouse. Compared to das, to knowledge. Knowledge is intimacy. It's not a mechanical act, sexuality. Sexuality is a connection to the divine. As the Torah puts it, man and woman were created as one. God separated them, and they want to reconnect to what? To the Tselem Elokim. Al Kain Yazov. That's why a man will leave his home to search for the other part of his soul. call a soulmate, in order for what? To reconnect to God. So the essence of the desire is unity with God. The fact that it gets hijacked by our narrow desires, why there's so much pleasure connected to sexuality is because there's so much divine pleasure. The fact that we use it for the wrong thing, that's our choice. Or maybe misunderstanding even what sexuality is. If you want more on this topic, which is not really the theme of our discussion this evening, you could read the chapter on intimacy in my book, Torah Meaning for Life. There I summed up basically how the Torah sees intimacy. So, what you're hearing here may be for the first time. You may not have heard this ever before about sexuality, because number one, people don't talk about it altogether because it's one of these shameful things, which is exactly opposite of what the Torah says. I'm not suggesting encouraging sex education in schools. That's not the point. I'm talking here to adults. So this is, but it has to be discussed also in a modest fashion, not in a provocative way. But the fact of the matter is, it is the single most powerful force in life and in history. Unfortunately, it's usually used in the other direction. So you could ask the question, the Talmud says, that when the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination for idolatry, was destroyed, which is why people don't crave idolatry. When's the last time you craved to do a little idol worship? So the Talmud also says that the craving, the desire, the Yetzer Hara for sexuality was also destroyed. And what happened? The chicken stopped laying eggs. That's what the Talmud says. Because they weren't motivated to bear fruit, to procreate. So it says the Yetzer Hara was returned. Now what does this mean? As I just said, sexuality or intimacy is not driven by the Yetzer Hara, it's driven by the divine. But because we live in a world where we do have two forces, two choices, so this sexuality is our choice, what we're going to do with it. So the pleasure of it, and the power of it, and the obsession of it is connected to a divine force. The fact that we use it for the negative is our choice. And goes to Rabbi Akiva's words, to the Roman philosopher who asked him, if God didn't want to have idol worship, he should have destroyed the sun and the moon. So there wouldn't be sun worshippers and moon worshippers. So Rabbi Akiva answered, V'chi mipnei hashetim ya'abed Hashem eselome. Is God going to destroy the world because of a few fools? Well, maybe there are more than a few, but that's what he answered him. So because a few people misunderstand why I created a sun and moon, that's why I'm going to destroy my sun and my moon. So the Baal Shem Tov on the Mishnah there asked the question, so the philosopher should have followed up with the question, why didn't God destroy the fools? Forget about the sun and the moon. So he answers, because of course, free will. We must have free will. I don't know which thinker it was that said, we have no choice, but we must believe in free will. We have no choice. So, think about that. Yeah. So the same is true with sexuality. The fact that people misuse it, just as they misuse gold. It says gold was created in order to build a mishkan with it. There was no reason gold would be created in this world except to build a holy temple for God. And what do we see? What happened to gold? How many people building temples with gold? Gold is not just gold, it's money. What is money used for? How many people even know that the money is spent to be for a whole? If you meet a good charitable person, they'll throw a little charity toward it. But to see that the whole money was created only to build holiness in this world, I'd like you to show me how many people feel that way. Interestingly, of all people, Warren Buffett may be the biggest example of true charity. That's another discussion. I'm not talking about what cause he's giving it for. But so to go back to the theme here, just to use one example, so even the so-called negative spaces we will enter in life is about a choice. Kivras hataiva could be translated, as I said, craving, terrible place to go to. And we all know when you get consumed with a taiva, with a desire, almost nothing can stop a person. People will tell you, when you're in that moment, you get completely overcome. You can know with your seichel, with your mind, that it's absolutely wrong, that you'll do destructive damage to yourself, to others, and still you can't control it. That's how powerful it is. But as the Baal Shem Tov says, that's a choice. And when you come to a place like that, you have a choice whether you're going to bury the taiva or you're going to be consumed by it. Now, how do you bury it? So there's ways. There's ways to harness. We're not talking about destroying desire. We're talking about channeling it. That's why in the Torah, the concept of avoiding sexuality is not a legitimate concept, because that's the way we were created. You're not going to naturally get people to not have a sexual life. So the answer is you have to harness it. That's why we call marriage kedushin. Kedushin means holiness. You have to harness it into kedusha, and then it can bring the greatest accomplishments, the greatest achievements. So that's one of 42. As you see, you can just focus on one of the journeys. We could also spend half our lives on that. So I just want to go through a few of them, a few major milestones. And as I said, since I've written about it, you can all look it up. If you have not left us your email address, just leave it and I'll send it to you. Make sure you have it. As I said, this week being Massei, I will conclude the last 4, hopefully, if I don't get stuck. But as I said, it's quite fascinating when you go through them all. You really find you can identify where you are right now. Now remember, you could be in the middle of 3-4 journeys at once, obviously. Doesn't mean that it has to happen in different years or different times. It's about a life space. So here's a few that I'd like to just point out, if I may. Okay? So as I said in the beginning, there's the first one, leaving Egypt. So though it's identified with birth, but remember, leaving this journey can happen many times in your lifetime. As some of you may know, it says, in every generation, and some add every day, a person has to envision as if they left Mitzrayim. So the first journey, Ela Massei, the first of the 42, is something that may happen many times in your life. In physical sense, birth, of course, is a very literal leaving the womb, the narrow space, Meitzar. Meitzar in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, comes from the word constraints, narrow space of the womb, and you're born. That's a physical type of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But every year Passover, even if you're not a newborn, we still recreate the experience. So the way the Chassidic masters explain it, Mitzrayim refers to all the constraints, any inhibition. In a sense, in one word, transcendence. The search for transcendence, the search to get out of whatever it is that traps you. Now these traps can be terrible, difficult traps. They could also be natural traps. Human beings aspire to get out of the so-called monotony of life. The word I'm using, the routines. So there's a while you can stay in those routines, and then at some point you feel you have to get out of that. People experience transcendence in different ways. Some through music, through art, and yes, through love and sexuality, through religion, through spirituality. Transcendence can be experienced in many ways. So this journey to leave Mitzrayim, in a way, is something that's you'll find many times in your life. These are times when you are trying to get out of a trap. It's usually psychological, it's not just physical. So it's an example of a journey that will happen, as I said, repeatedly. And identifying it is a key thing, because when you can understand that part of your journey, it helps you align yourself to that. Because after everything is said and done, these 42 journeys, why they told in the Torah? Because it's meant to be like a compass. Think of it of mapping out your life, these 42 different phases, and then identifying where you are, and then you can align yourself. You say, oh yeah, I understand this journey. That's where I am at. What's the challenge? What's the opportunity? What am I supposed to do with this? As I said, some of them will be very pleasant journeys. And that too is a challenge. That doesn't mean... It's also a journey to the promised land. So that's journey number 1. The next one, just to describe the first few as like the early stages of life, but also they, as I said, they can happen many different times in your life, is from Ramses to Sukkot. So in Hebrew, the word Sukkah, which is the holiday of Sukkah, which is when we sit in a portable hut. But a sukkah really is a place that symbolizes the clouds, the Anani HaKavod, the clouds that God surrounded and protected the people in. So think of it when someone embraces you, like a hug. It's a type of a sukkah. In Hasidic language, a sukkah is a makif. It surrounds you, like a talus in a way. In Judaism, you'll find that there are, using Kabbalistic language a little, there are mitzvahs that are like makifim, and there are mitzvahs that are pnimim. There are mitzvahs that are about encompassing, like surrounding you, and there are mitzvahs that enter, that permeate. For example, as opposed to a sukkah which surrounds you, taking a lulav and an esrog and the 4 species and taking it to your heart, that's symbolic of something that enters within. So there are things that are surrounding. A talit surrounds, tzitzis is like pnimi. You'll find consistently in Jewish thought, Jewish customs, rituals, this makif pnimi so-called balance. It's like anything in life. If you love someone, you embrace them. But an embrace is not enough. Sometimes you have to speak with them as well. You can't just say you embrace them. You have to talk about details of life. It's not just a general embrace. We can live in a home that protects us, but we also have to have places, personal places that we can sit in. So in a way, you can say love and a relationship consists of a makif that surrounds, and another part that is much more personalized and more internal. And they both play off each other. They both complement each other, and both are necessary. So Sukkot, which means like shelters basically, is essentially, think of it in childhood terms. A child is born, comes out of Mitzrayim, comes out of the womb, and what's the next step for a child when it comes out of the womb? To be protected. Now that it's entered a harsh world, healthy parents have to build a sukkah for this child, in a symbolic sense, a home, a protective environment. You have to hug that child, you have to embrace the child. I'll never forget, I may have shared it here, I don't remember. I'll never forget this video I saw. Someone happened to send it to me. And I was watching, I didn't even know what I was expecting to see. Do you remember a guy called John Bradshaw in the 70s? He's like one of the first so-called self-help gurus. But he was the real thing. He himself grew up he was a priest, I think a former priest. Grew up in the home of a father that was an alcoholic and abusive and physically abusive. One of these. So he's one of the first recovery guys. And he was one of the earliest people who coined the phrase, I don't know if he's the originator, of the concept of the inner child, which has become more popular. Last time I talked about an inner child, the guy came over to me and says he has a problem with his inner adult. He only has a child left. So, you know what it was? You know what it was. So I remember this video, which it blew me away. It was very powerful. He had like 50 people in a room. They were sitting in chairs, and he was doing a workshop, and he had them all close their eyes. I didn't close my eyes because I wanted to see the video. So I'm watching, and they close their eyes, and then suddenly you hear in the background, I guess sound, the sound system, suddenly there's complete silence. These are adults, bunch of adult men and women. You hear the thumping of a heartbeat, a very amplified sound of a heartbeat. You can tell, like this beat, bump, 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 back and forth, the heartbeat. And then Bradshaw begins to speak very slowly, very deliberately. In the beginning I thought some stage thing. What is this? But after a few minutes, I realized even if it was staged, the impact was unbelievable. He starts speaking very slowly to the people, and he says the reason he's playing this heartbeat is he wants everyone to imagine that they're being clutched by their mother to her chest, and the baby is hearing the newborn, the heart of the mother, which of course for 9 months that's all you hear. So. And he's going on very slowly. It was like a slow meditation, so to speak. And the people are envisioning. He was speaking very, very, very calmly. So he says, "So here's your mother speaking to you. You hear the heartbeat bumping the whole time, so it's hard to ignore." And he starts saying, "Your mother's telling you," and he becomes the mother, so to speak. This is the voice of your mother. I've been waiting for you for so long to come to this world. I will protect you from every harm. I will build for you a little cat crib with a blanket. I'll tuck you in every night. Should anyone ever want to harm you, you know that I'm always there. He went on, started going on and on. I could tell you, the whole place started crying, as I did. It was unbelievable. First of all, the impact, and what he was saying was impossible to ignore its truth. And he went on and on. I don't remember all the details, but it was the resonance that this is what maybe you never heard from your mother, but you should have heard. So maybe you're crying because you never heard it. But the cry came from a certain, this is like what every child should expect. The impact, I remember, it was enormous. I've tried to find the video, I can't find it anymore. I'm sure you can dig it up. It was pretty powerful. And I realized that, this guy came to it, of course, through a lot of pain. He was trying to teach the people that if you've not had this in your life, this is what you need to recreate. You need to find that type of heart. You need to find that nurturing. Maybe you have to nurture yourself. But to me, it's like a perfect description. Children at that age obviously are not consciously thinking about, I need to have someone embrace me. It's something that should be expected. A child comes to this world. A natural, loving parents, that's what they do, father or mother. They clutch you, they hold you, you hear their heartbeat, you feel soothed. And it's not just soothing, like for a moment, it's establishing that at the beginning of your life you have this strong foundation that later, whatever will come, you built up a security, you built up a confidence, self-confidence that can face every enemy. I have no doubt, and from my limited experience in life, that most problems begin at that stage. The early stages, when you either had that or you didn't have it, will define most of your life. Which is in a way beautiful, but also in a way tragic. Because no child makes that choice. It's your parents who make the choice, which just shows us how powerful parents can be in a person's life. Does that mean if you didn't have it, you're doomed? No, by no means. Absolutely not. In Judaism, there's no such thing as doomed. As I think it was the Rebbe that said to someone said, he asked him, what do you do nowadays? He says, I find myself... Oh no, someone says, what are you doing to bring Judaism into your campus? This was Rabbi Sachs from England. So he told the Rebbe, he says, I find myself on a campus where I can't really do anything. So the Rebbe said to him, I've never heard that a Jew finds himself anywhere. You put yourself in places. What do you mean you found yourself? Which is just language, but it's expression of a victim. I find myself. You are there. Someone put you there. What do you mean you found yourself? The idea of not being a victim. So there's no question if a person did not have this type of nurturing, it's going to be challenging, but it doesn't mean you cannot replace it. There are ways to do it if you really want to. So the second step, Sukkot, is about that protection. Now this isn't only for little children, newborn children. This obviously is the most natural place, but this is also true in our own lives. The people you love. Are you providing them that type of nurturing, that protection? Or everyone feels tough love or whatever you call it. Everybody can take care of themselves. So of course there's a certain element of giving people and allowing them to face challenges. But there are times that you do have to provide a sukkah for someone else, and they may have to provide it for you. It's one of the things that are deeply lacking in this world that we live in, where we're all taught that you got to survive at all costs, survival of the fittest. This type of sensitivity and nurturing is a profoundly lacking element in every community, whether it's religious communities, non-religious. Wherever you go, you find it lacking. Because we live in this very tough world. New York is a tough place, and it's almost seen as a weakness that I need nurturing. Something. We live in a world that's a vulnerable world, and we all need nurturing. Period. So this journey makes it very clear that every human being needs nurturing. Do you need it the same way when you're young or when you're old? Sometimes, yeah. You never know. Everybody's got their moments, and what we usually do to so-called compensate is much worse. Instead of going and looking for that nurturing, we try to find other ways to self-medicate is one way, but there are other ways that we learn to distract ourselves and almost say we don't need it, and then you create more problems. Just like a flower needs water, there's no way around it. A human being needs love, and sukkah is a critical element. That's like step number 2. The step number 3 in the 3 journeys. And I said I'm just going to take a few. I don't know how much time we have. You keep telling me what's the story. Okay, over. Time out one. We haven't reached the promised land yet, so we're going to go on until we reach the promised land. How do you like that? Until you all leave. Which one will come first? What do you think? Bubble. till everybody leaves or till we reach the promised land. But like, as they say in these contracts, whatever comes first. I'll go through a few more and then we'll take a little pause between journeys. The third one, well, maybe I was going to skip maybe to the fourth one in a second. Yeah. I'll skip to the fourth one. The third one. So from Etham to Piacherus. They go from a place called Freedom Valley, and they camp near a place called Migdal. So the commentaries explain, and by the way, one of the commentaries where I found a lot of the interpretations was actually the Targum. Targum Onkelos. There's another Targum called Targum Yenison Ben Uziel. The Targum were Aramaic translations of the Bible, which, interestingly, even though you think, if you know Hebrew, what do you need the Targum for? But the Targum ends up being many ways to understand the Hebrew, you need the Targum. Even Rashi many times, who's the practical commentator on Chumash, will say, like the Targum says, which is like interesting that you need a translation. But the fact is, Hebrew is sometimes very cryptic, and the different Targum, which means literally translation, they actually illuminated different nuances. So the Targum Yenison, which is a more elaborate, Targum Onkelos was of course a convert, but his Targum is one of the classics. So his Targum is more literal, word by word. Like many of the names of the 42 journeys, he just Cherus is Cherus. He doesn't translate it. But the Targum Yenison does. So what he translates here is like this: that this place was called the Freedom Valley because this is where the Jews became a free people. And this was also, it says in this journey, that they also camped across the Baal Shem Tov, which was a deity, Egyptian deity. So this leg of the journey is the point where we, from childhood, lose our innocence as we enter into adulthood. So that not every one of us, at some point, lost our innocence, whether you like it or not. It may be the first time you learned how to lie. I mean, lie is in deception. Or the first time that you did something unethical. You see, little children, newborn children, and even the first formative years, don't understand the world of what we call duplicity. What you see is what you get. That's why someone says to a child something, the child will accept it. So when the child learn that you could say one thing and mean something else, they don't suddenly become smart. They learn it from their role models, from their parents, and from their educators, and from what they see, what they witness. And we will usually not remember that moment when you crossed over from an innocent little child to suddenly what we call a seasoned adult. So we call a seasoned adult is actually a person who's become contaminated by the corruption of this world. So this journey deals with that. So it's quite interesting one to analyze. Because I would say even today in our lives, even once you're long away from your childhood, there's still times where we are very much drawn to the enchantment of youth, of a time when things were more peaceful. When people think back to childhood memories, there's certain memories that you never forget. So in Torah, in a certain interesting way, it's almost like a human being is always in search for that child again, for that pure child. They tell the story of a Rebbe who was once having a Hasidic Verbringen with his Chassidim. And it was very inspiring and very uplifting, and everybody was, in the moment. It was a magical moment. And as what happens in a Verbringens like this, they ran out of l'chaim, drinks, and of mezainis, of no more cake, herring, or whatever else was there. So nobody wanted to leave the room because they were so in this moment that you don't want to lose the connection. But they ran out, and the Rebbe, seeing that nobody else was doing anything, suddenly gets up, and everyone was somewhat a little embarrassed, and he's about to walk out. So they said, "No, Rebbe, you stay, we'll go." So he said, the Rebbe says, no, I'm just going out to tell a child by the door to bring a little more mezenis and so on. By the time they were able to figure it out, he walked out. And he came back 10-15 minutes later, and they realized that he didn't send the child, he went himself. So afterwards, of course, when he came back, they said, if you would have gone yourself, we would have known. You said you're going to the child. So he said, I did say that, and that's exactly what happened. We adults were so involved with our own so-called spiritual inspiration, we became selfishly spiritual, as he put it. So I went outside to go and to find my child inside of me that's not so self-interest drives me. And that's who I sent to go bind the mezenos. In other words, we all have inside of ourselves a place that you do something's not always for a particular self-interest. Or particular goal. I remember one of the early experiences I had. I remember I was working and writing the talks of the Rebbe, and we did it as a labor of love. We were students in yeshiva. It was the greatest honor. The Rebbe would speak. We had to memorize it, and we'd write it down. I remember a guy came, and I was so naive. I must say, I still am a little naive, but I was even more naive then. I don't know if you can get less naive. You probably get, you get less naive, you don't get more naive. But I remember the guy came, and we needed someone to volunteer to type. So instead of volunteering, the guy started saying, how much do you pay here? And nobody got paid there. And I was 19 years old. I said, we all do this, He says, what? What do you mean? How do you, no one does anything for nothing. So I said, it's not nothing. We get a lot of pleasure from this. And I remember it was like two different worlds. It was the first time I was exposed. As I said, I didn't consider myself a naive guy at that age. But I realized, and as you get older, people say that. They say, hey, nothing is done for nothing. The fact of the matter is, young children do things for nothing. It's this attitude, even though it makes so much sense. You rub my back, I rub yours, favor for a favor, cash in favors. It's become the way of the world, but doesn't necessarily mean that is the highest standard. I mentioned before Abraham. So the Rambam actually says that everyone does things for ulterior motives. Shalei l'shma. But he says one man, Abraham, he did truth because it was true. There is that concept. So I'm not suggesting we can always come to that place. But there's a part in each one of us that I no doubt resonates when something is done for no motive. There's a purity to it, a certain power to it. I think they probably have to daven here. Is this where the minion is here? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So not downstairs here, right? Okay. So let me just conclude on a upbeat note of the 42 journeys. I'll say the following. I remember once I heard this line. It was very powerful. It says, "Pischuli kechudish shamachat." God says to every one of us, "Open for me an eye of a needle, and I will open for you the widest corridors, Pischi shel Ulam, of the temple," which is appropriate for these 3 weeks. So the way it was interpreted was like this: God does not ask us to change our lives completely. You can't expect that from anyone. God says, "Open me up an eye of a needle, one corner of your home, of your life, one space, one moment. But in that moment, in that space, in that corner, there should be nothing but me and you." Meaning no self-interest. Purely do it for a higher purpose. So to expect that our whole day and our whole lives, it's hard to expect that from mortals like us. But to expect that we find those moments, that can be expected of everyone. And you can't imagine what kind of power it will give you if you allow it to feed. So we'll continue next week in these journeys. The journeys don't stop. But just remember, your life is a journey, and nothing stops where you are. Everything is leading to another place. And there's a script that's higher than we can understand. So, with that being said, I'd like to wish everyone a good night. And may your journeys only be pleasant ones. And may we finally be blessed to reach the promised land, as is promised us in this week's chapter. Everyone should have a very good week and a very simchadika week. Good night. Good night to the web.